My name is Lorin, and I'm the director of the Center for Fiction, and it is my pleasure to begin today with a few thank yous and by welcoming you all here to the center. I don't know if it's just the weather that's on our side, or if in New York City especially it's true that everybody's a critic, but I'm very, very glad to see such a large audience to celebrate Roger today. We'll do two things today. We'll have the conference, and a very important part of the conference will be the presentation of the annual Shattuck Prizes for criticism. So I hope you'll all stay for that and enjoy that, because it will be very special. That will be an annual award. I'd like to begin now with these thank yous. All of us at the center would like to thank the elegant, incomparable, graceful, and warm Nora Shattuck. Roger, as we all know, was a wise man, and we are here to celebrate his intellectual legacy. But as is immediately apparent to anyone who knows her, the smartest thing Roger ever did in his life was to marry Nora. She's an absolutely extraordinary woman in every way. And this whole day, these annual awards for criticism and the donation of the wonderful Shattuck collection to the Center for Fiction all comes from Nora and her family. The entire family has been involved from the start, and we'd like to thank them as well, including his daughter, Patricia Shattuck, and granddaughter, Ruth Shattuck Bernstein, who are here with us today. They have all supported the conference and the new annual Shattuck Awards for Criticism, and have all been involved in the wonderful gift of a large part of Roger's collection and accompanying ephemera to the Center for Fiction. A very special thanks goes to Jennifer Lyons, Roger's longtime agent, who introduced the Shattuck family to the Center for Fiction. I'd also like to thank our tireless conference director, Stan Burnett, and his associate, Medaya Ocher. Thanks also to our distinguished advisory committee, who you'll find listed in your program, and to Larry Bensky of Radio Proust, who's videotaping the events today. Thanks also to all our speakers and panelists who have agreed to turn their critical skills to the craft of criticism itself, to critique criticism and to imagine its future in the age of the quick soundbite, Twitter, and the iPad. I'd like now to introduce to you a very special friend of Roger's who will open the conference for us. You may all know Bob Weil as executive editor at W.W. Norton, where he's been in that position since 1998, and as Roger's editor. He was his editor both at St. Martin's and Norton, and edited 4 of his books, including Forbidden Knowledge and one of his Proust books. Please join me in welcoming Bob Weil. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you especially to Noreen and to Stan Burnett and to the Shattuck family and to Jennifer Lyons. Just echoing what Noreen said, and you'll understand this from my speech, Roger would especially want you to have your cell phones turned off. Let me begin. There is a curious divide I've arbitrarily decided between those people, say, born between 1925 and those born subsequently. At the time when email and the internet first came into dominant use in the United States between 1994 and 1997, there were those who eagerly or perhaps reluctantly adopted it, realizing that business and personal communication demanded its use, and those who steadfastly refused. Among those who refused to heed email's siren call, there was yet another divide, those who either out of infirmity or ineptitude failed to master computer skills, and then those few crusty souls who actually harbored an animus, believing that internet knowledge was dangerous, that certain things should stay well forbidden. Roger Shattuck, born in August of 1923, was one of those stalwarts. A formidable scholar, and I must add, a fine craftsman, he could have handily mastered the intricacies of email, but in Bartleby-like fashion, he preferred not to. Talked into a laptop by his younger colleague, Shattuck tossed it out after a matter of mere months, preferring to write his articles by hand, and once satisfied, typed them up and mailed them in the post. So determined was he to avoid email that even when I would urgently need revised copy, he would drive to the office of one Cindy Kimball, a woman who specialized in office services in Lincoln, Vermont, and have her send me an attachment. I still have the C. Kimball email in my Shattuck file. His aversion to all things technological extended beyond the confines of the farm. The scholar Michael Prince recalls his friend going to the Vermont State Board of Education, getting the ear of someone on the board and questioning whether schools were adopting online technology all too hastily. So does Nora Shattuck remember her husband trying to get the school board to drop Apple computers. He would have been happier if these students had just, quote, gotten down with a dictionary and a book to read. Shattuck's reservations about 21st century, much less 20th century technology were not limited to the web. While more receptive to the telephone, he was hardly what we might call a phone person, a fact borne out by Jennifer Lyons, who writes, I would remember having to arrange for a specific time to call Roger because he would be working down in his own writing cabin. I had this vision of him with his long legs trekking towards the main house, his head bursting with ideas, and he would get on the phone and know just what he wanted to say. This log cabin described by Amy Boaz as a tiny shack that was brilliant with sunlight, furnished with a small stove and crammed with aged, brittle books, I suspect some are here now, that act as insulation against the Vermont chill, came to reflect Roger's antediluvian traits. The cabin, in fact, had no electricity, and Roger confessed in this Publishers Weekly interview that he worked by kerosene and, if required, on a Remington typewriter. Rosanna Warren, the poet who became a friend at BU, recalled Roger not only as an inspiring mentor, but a man who sized his own meadows and pitted his physical strength against the hay. I would be remiss if I did not add that he prided himself on winning a scything contest in Vermont against like these young townsmen who was far more able than he was. Not a few people I spoke with invoked Thoreau in describing him. Yet to reduce Roger, whose lifelong pursuit of the avant-garde brought him eminent acclaim, and who helped introduce Dada to the United States, to a Luddite and a reincarnation of the priggish Dr. Bowdler, would do him an injustice, I think. If you knew Roger as I did over a period of 15 years and 4 books, he was not what I call censorious. In fact, his memorable trait may have been his inquisitive nature, and I can still visualize the probing eyes, the high forehead, the distinct patrician gaze, which provided a splendid contrast with his folksy shirts, as you just saw in that film. Adds Jed Perl, whose posthumous essay on Shattuck and familiarity with the unpublished journals makes him one of America's leading Shattuck scholars. The great thing about Forbidden Knowledge, his last major work, is that he raises questions about intense sexual themes without denying their appeal, in contrast to other scholars, Perl believes, who would gainsay the visceral thrills provided by sex and hedonism. Let me illustrate this point through direct experience. I remember having many editorial discussions with Roger about his insistence to include extremely graphic descriptions of the Marquis de Sade in his last major work. So concerned, however, was Shattuck about the pornographic nature of these depictions: a man masturbating on a crucifix, fathers raping their sons, nuns having their breasts knifed off in flagrante delicto, this is Sade, that he asked that we print a warning in the front matter advising parents and teachers that they should be aware that Chapter 7 does not make appropriate reading for children and minors, to say the least. Christopher Ricks commented to me just last week that Roger's fulminations were, quote, less an attack on Marquis de Sade than taking Marquis de Sade to one's bosom. So troubled was Shattuck with the cultural rehabilitation of Sade that he purposely quoted scandalous passages to prove that an entire generation of intellectuals, from Simone de Beauvoir, who wrote that Sade's eroticism doesn't lead to murder but to literature, to Roland Barthes, who needed Sade, and I'm quoting Roger, to provide the final test and proof of his semiotic system, had become trapped in a Vulcan's net of abasement and depravity. He could not understand how these critics, as he saw it, his people, had rejected the beauty of parable and the tale, deconstructing their meaning while abjuring their wisdom. Though not wishing to take on the role of the censor, Shattuck nonetheless became increasingly alarmed that there were some things that were best left unexamined. I suspect that some Faustian battle between propriety and ecstasy, between innocence and hedonism, had always raged within him. He did, after all, name his last collection Candor and Perversion. But as he reached his 70s, he became more certain that the prelapsarian world of his youth had yielded to a technocracy that was careening out of control. To know Roger was to appreciate this deep contrarian streak. His attack on semiotics was hardly his first brush with controversy. His penchant for iconoclasm manifested it really early on. Though raised in a stately brownstone and schooled at St. Paul's, Roger disdained the trappings of wealth and society, unlike his maternal grandfather, who owned horses and played polo. Those summers were spent at the well-worn house in Wilton, Connecticut. Both Roger and his brother Francis were encouraged to take up woodworking and to learn how to stoke a furnace, something I think Roger probably did quite well. At Yale, he excelled in academics, not only achieving Phi Beta Kappa as his father Howard had done, but surrounded himself with a group of undergraduates, many of them Jewish, who preferred poetry to ponies, French literature to fraternities. Perhaps no single act demonstrated Roger's nonconformist nature than his decision to marry Nora White, a dancer with the Ballet Russe whom he avidly pursued over a period of several years, sending her passionate letters that she didn't bother to answer. He'd provide blank pages for her to fill in the responses, but she told me she ignored these, believing it just didn't make sense to answer someone from Yale. Once Nora reversed courses and took to the suitor who could not be daunted, other challenges still remained. Chief among them was the concern that Nora might not be, well, completely acceptable to his family. It was hard for the Shattocks to imagine their son being married to a woman who made her living dancing on the stage, though the very fact that Nora was a dancer enhanced her forbidden appeal to him. When Roger's mother, whom Texas colleague Fred Brown recalls speaking with a patrician accent, began grilling her future daughter-in-law on whether the Whites belonged to the Ottawa Social Registry, Roger was furious, demanding that his mother stop this interrogation at once. Although the marriage was duly announced in the New York Times, it was not a society wedding, since the young couple had only informed their parents about their nuptials 3 weeks in advance. Rather than selecting an apartment with a Butterfield exchange, the young couple, by then Roger was already a junior editor at Harcourt Brace, had already been taking Kerouac around town, rented a cold water flat on the Lower East Side, Stanton Street, for which they paid $18 a month and had to share a bathroom with another couple. Must have been a very appealing refuge, because Nora remembers it fondly. So many critics have written eloquently about Roger's most well-known work, The Banquet Years, that it is unnecessary for me in this informal talk to discuss its implications. By far, the most recent essay that examines them is Jed Perl's Halftime, which appeared in the New Republic, and I would encourage anyone to read it.